Hi there. Jerry Audet, managing editor of Surfcasters Journal, back again with a little bit of exclusive content here for our subscribers. Just trying to bring some entertainment things to get you through the winter. I'm going to talk just very briefly about skinny soft plastics and some available products that have come to the marketplace in the last couple of years, and one that's coming to the marketplace very soon. It's out now, just come out. And there's a lot of confusion or assumptions about skinny soft plastics, specifically the long eel type, that I want to dispel really quickly. Not going to get into much detail, but I just want to bring you a few products that I really like, and talk about why and maybe the differences, because a lot of guys look at something like the original Hoagie Slappy eel, the long 13-inch one, and make a lot of assumptions about what this is for and how to fish it. So really briefly, just talking about the classifications really quick. These skinny soft plastics that are on the table, which I'm going to show you here in a second, they're very different than something like a Lunker City Sluggo, no matter how you rig it. These smaller soft plastics that are thicker and denser, they are more either jerkbait-like or jig-like in their nature. These these lures, I guess they're not plugs. These lures here, these skinny soft plastics, are really in a classification of their own. So one of the big things I want you to take away from this whole little talk I'm going to give, these few minutes I'm going to talk about, is if you think to use these the same way you would use this, you're wrong, I think. These require some different presentations because of their length, because of the fluid nature of the body, that you really need to use these in a very different way. And frankly, skipping ahead, I think that these work okay or fantastic, depending what they are and how you're doing it, on retrieves, on a straight retrieve, on a jerking retrieve, various different presentations of retrieves. These work fine. I have found that it has been difficult to produce a lot of high quality fish on straight retrieves on some of these things. They work a lot better swinging in a current. Doesn't have to be an inlet, doesn't have to be an estuary. Just some moderate moving, even just subtle moving current. And I think that has a lot to do with the length of the body. And if you're retrieving it, there's a lot of nonsense that can happen in terms of twisting and stuff. And you're constantly fighting with a phenomena where you have a long body that's light, and you have weight at the front, even with a weightless. And so you're constantly fighting some situation where the head and the body are not moving in the same direction. It doesn't look natural. I'm not saying for 1 minute that you can't produce casting directly out and reeling it back in. I'm just saying that in my experience, they perform much better when you're casting them up current and sliding them down current or across the current or something like that. Okay? I'm not going to get into how you do that or any other tips. That's just the tip I'm going to give you there. Now, there have been a few that have come to the market in the last few years I really want to bring attention to, but I do want to give a shout out to Hoagie first and foremost, because Hoagie, while they're not the first ones to make something like this, they really are the more modern, one of the modern makers to make it, and still makes it. They're of the ones, the earliest ones, they're all gone. Hoagie is one of the originals of this size and type of plastic who still continues to produce them mass market. The Hoagie is a stiff, harder, soft plastic. It's a narrow profile, which gives it sort of a cutting nature through the water, which can be advantageous or disadvantageous. It just really depends on what you're trying to do with it. The toughness can also be an advantage or disadvantage. The advantage is it holds up. The disadvantage is it doesn't have quite as much lifelike movement like something like the GT eel does. This is a gravity tackle GT eel. This is the 13.5-inch model. This is probably the most premium product. I think it is the most premium product on the table. It's very soft. It's very whippy. It's very realistic in the water. It's also very thin, very thin. It casts not great, and they're easy to be destroyed. I destroy these very quickly. A couple schoolies will tear this up. The smallest bluefish in the world just snips right through this in a millisecond. Of course, you're never going to be able, even with the Hoagie, which is probably the toughest thing on the table, I mean, if a bluefish even looks at this sideways, they're going to cut right through it. These are definitely not bluefish safe baits. But this is probably the most sensitive, but this is also the most realistic. And I think that in subtle situations where you're trying to fool big fish who are being fussy, this would probably be my choice of all the ones on the table here. Now, the next one I'm going to bring up is the Joe Baggs Block Island eel. I forgot the name of it for a second. This one, please note, has a little snip off the end of the tail. It's not actually that stubby. I just noticed it right now when I'm filming, and I'm not going to go get another one. This one's all used as well because I've used this a lot. This is sort of in between the two products I just showed you, the Hoagie and the GT. This is a thicker bait. It's a more rugged bait. I still don't think it's as rugged as the Hoagie, but it's also a lot bigger profile in terms of how thick it is. You can see it's sort of a triangle, so it's flat on top, which is similar to the 12-inch Sluggo, but it's a lot thinner than that, and it's a lot whippier than that. This doesn't have nearly the motion that this does. Okay, this really is a big jerk bait, and this is more of whatever you want to call these, which I'm hesitant to call them an eel, which I'll get to in a second. This is a great affordable bait. It's not maybe as premium a product as the GT or even the Hoagie, but if you're on a budget, this is a fantastic lure that works fantastic. It's still super effective. They're a chunkier profile, so it's a bigger profile. It's going to put out a little bit different vibration, a little bit more vibration. It's a little bit more buoyant. That's the other thing about both of these is if you put any weight on these at all, they get right to the bottom because they're both extremely thin and light, especially with the GT. And for us guys in the surf, if you're casting from the surf, even at 3/4 of an ounce, you can put this down into 12 feet of water with some pretty damn good current. It'll really get down. And sometimes you don't want that. So sometimes you want something a little bit more chunky, something a little bit bigger. Well, that's where something like this Joe Baggs Block Island eel comes in. Or the newest product on the table, this is Al Gagg's Twitch It eel. I always get confused because everything else is Whip It, but Twitch It eel. This has a similar profile as something like the Mega Shad used to have. It's much, much longer than that, but it has a tapered body that tapers down into like a very thin tail, but it's a chunkier body. The body is similar maybe to the Block Island eel. It's a little thinner. It's not triangular shaped. It is similar to a 12-inch Sluggo. It's a little bit thinner than that. It's definitely a lot softer than that. This is a soft plastic. Again, I would put the density and how it holds up similar to the GT. It's not as tough as the Joe Bag products or the Hoagie product, and certainly not a Lunker City. But again, if you want that lifelike, really whippy, very fluid, the most subtle water movements are going to make these products really move a lot. While these products, Hoagie's okay, but these products maybe not quite so much. The Hoagie's probably the worst in terms of that, whereas the Joe's is the next. Lunker City is the worst. I mean, Lunker City, you're not going to get that lifelike sort of flutter from this, even though I actually prefer these in most situations, actually, where I'm casting out and retrieving, because I'm working this more fish-like, where I'm swinging this maybe a little bit more eel-like. Where you might present something like a live eel, I would use these things. Where you're going to choose maybe a traditional plug, I would use something like this. I'm not going to go into details because that's for a seminar-length discussion, but I just wanted to bring some of these to your attention because a lot of people get very confused. They get into a camp of, this is better than that, and I don't think any of these is better than any of the other. There's all kinds of reasons to buy these. There's price, how they stand up, the profile you're looking for, how you want to rig them. Something like the new Al Gags works really nice with a BKK or a owner hook on the front or a trocar. Any of these hooks, the VMC, there's a bunch of swim bait, they work really nice. I have not had that level of success with the GT, but then again, with this rigging, with these massive tinned hooks that you can get, the Atlas stuff you can get from GT that matches these, this is a tremendously strong, just outrageously strong hook. There's no comparison to something like this, or frankly, even this jig that I have on here, which is an economy jig, and I won't give them a shout out, but it's an economy jig. This is a really good hook too, but whatever he's using for these Atlas is out of this world. They're just super strong. And frankly, you couldn't rig something like this with this setup. Even the Joe or the Joe Bags or the Hoagie's getting close, but the rigging of the GT is really interesting because they're so thin, because they're so soft. You can get away with this kind of interesting rigging, which I really like because it's really hard to hang up with this. Okay, even something like this, I think sometimes you bump and it can twist or something, and you can hang up. And I don't have that trouble with this rigging. So that's sort of all I wanted to say. I just want to bring some of these to your attention. There are various different prices, price points, and availability. Some of them are a little bit harder to get than others. I really think it's something you should add to your bag, and I'm going to end with this. If you think this is supposed to just mimic an eel, you're wrong. I would suggest using these in all kinds of different situations where there's a variety of bait fish. And frankly, these would work around bunker because a bunker has a very thin profile when looked at straight on or from the bottom. It's only from the side that they look wide. And so when you're thinking about what this might look like, looking from the bottom, it can be very bunker-like or herring-like. I mean, these are pretty big. They're all roughly 13 inches, 12 to 13 inches. They're a little bit long for something like that, but they're getting close to potentially what a herring would look like. But even something like lobsters, squid, blackfish, things you wouldn't really think about, you need to think about where the fish is looking at it and what the vibration pattern is that these are putting out, which is pretty substantial when you consider their flexible body and what the wave output is, the vibration pattern that they're putting out, what that might mean. Again, that's a 2-hour long seminar talk, so I'm not going to do that right now. But it's something for you to consider as you go into the 2024 season. If you're afraid of these, don't be afraid of them. Fish them like a plug, swing them like a bucktail, use them like you might a sluggo. They work in all those situations. Again, I think they work a little better if you're working with a current versus against it or just casting straight out to waves and bringing it back. But they do work in those situations as well. And again, think about what you want your plugs to do and think about where these could fit in. And don't just take my word that they work, but figure out where they work for you. And that's really the key with any plug. And I think that these get a bad rap in some ways. And also people use them wrong because they make a lot of assumptions about, well, it's supposed to be just for eels. They're not just for eels.